Good day everyone. Looks like MiHoYo has put out their usual week before release character information, this time for Kazuha. So let's see if we can't take a look at it and try and figure out what Kazuha's role should be. Now, the first thing to note immediately states that he is a support character to increase party damage, so I have to look further to see if he can still be a main DPS or if he's pretty much just a support. First, it states here by triggering a swirl reaction, Kazuha can further buff his teammates with an elemental damage bonus for their corresponding element. Now, this is very similar to Sucrose, as it gives essentially a bonus to characters of the element of which they swirl. However, it's elemental damage bonus instead of elemental mastery. So that's going to be better and worse depending on the situation. If you're pretty much going for a pure element build, you were using Electro Kaching and then Beidou, then Kazuha would make significantly more sense than Sucrose, as Sucrose's elemental mastery bonus wouldn't really be doing anything. On the other hand, if you're going for more of an overload type build, then Sucrose would obviously make significantly more sense, as elemental mastery are one of the only things that can increase overload damage, whereas the elemental damage bonus wouldn't really be doing anything. Now for melt comps or vaporize comps, I'm not totally sure which one would necessarily be better. It probably just depends on how much of which you have. If you have a lot of elemental mastery, but don't have a particularly large amount of elemental damage bonus, then Kazuha would probably be better. On the flip side, if you have a good amount of elemental damage bonus, but don't have a whole lot of elemental mastery, then Sucrose would probably be better. Now let's take a look at his normal attacks and his charge attacks. They definitely do look pretty cool. The last hit on his normal attack is definitely interesting. And you can see that there's some sort of effect when he sheaths the blade. Now, to be honest, I kind of think that this might just be a visual thing to hide, the weapon, larger weapons, for example, going through characters' hands. But I guess it's possible that this might be some sort of mechanic that Kazuha has at the same time. It definitely isn't the weapon, as I'm pretty sure this is just a fillet blade. But overall, nothing particularly special there. So next we come to his elemental skill. The elemental skill looks like it has a press and then a hold version, and looks like it gathers in enemies and sends Kazuha skyward. Once you use the ability then, it seems to give you a one-time special plunge attack, which then knocks enemies away, but then also has some sort of small, almost like an air vent effect that seems to sort of draw enemies in. Now, major thing I think to note here is that this effect seems pretty small, like very small. It doesn't seem to have much radius, and it also doesn't seem to be particularly strong. Slimes are, generally speaking, a creature which is quite susceptible to crowd control, knockbacks, and things like that, and they really don't seem to be moving. So while it does look like he has some crowd control, it looks very weak. Next we come to his ultimate. Now his ultimate looks very pretty. It does look very nice. However, it simultaneously doesn't really hit very frequently. It looks like it hits maybe once every 2 or 3 seconds. And it seems to have no crowd control whatsoever. Neither the slimes seem to move at all. Now that we've seen a little bit of his skills and what they do, we can probably now draw a few conclusions. The first conclusion is that he probably really can't be a main DPS. The reason simply being that he does not look to have a Nemo infusion into his attacks. So if you build him as a Nemo, then his ultimate and his skill will do significant damage, but his normal and charge attacks won't really do much, so it probably just makes more sense to use his ultimate, use his skill, and then swap to a different character who can actually make use of their normal attacks. At the same time, because he does have a tap mode and a hold mode, it's very likely that the tap mode has a low cooldown, maybe somewhere between, it could be like 5-7 seconds or something along those lines. And so you could throw in a comp where you basically just have a bunch of characters who have very short cooldowns on their skills, and thus not really have a main character, but endlessly cycle through their skills. The next thing I think to note is probably crowd control. As I already stated earlier, it doesn't really look like his crowd control is particularly good, so he definitely seems to fall behind characters like, say, Traveler or Sucrose in that sense. In addition to this, due to the fact that his ultimate doesn't look like it applies Anemo damage very often, and his skill essentially looks like it applies Anemo damage twice, once for the skill itself, and then the second being the plunge attack, it doesn't really seem like he would make a tremendous amount of sense to build in the type of swirl build as, say, Sucrose, or again the Anemo Traveler. And so due to those reasons, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure why you'd get Kazuha if you already have Sucrose. Now, as we stated at the beginning, if you want elemental damage bonus for the team rather than elemental mastery, then Kazuha obviously is better there. However, even though that is the case, he also doesn't have anywhere near the crowd control that, say, Sucrose has, which can drastically decrease the time certain fights take. And so personally, even if I were to do a pure elemental team, like Electro Kaching and Beidou, I'd probably honestly still end up using Sucrose, as that crowd control is frankly difficult to beat. And so I think that sums up my thoughts on Kazuha. He's a very cool looking character, I do like his abilities a lot, but the fact that he does not have an Anemo infusion I think pretty much means he can't really be a main DPS, and crowd control is one major thing that I look for in Anemo characters, and Kazuha's frankly doesn't seem to be particularly good. So in the end, I think I'll probably save my Primo Gems and just continue to use Sucrose. Now I'd like to talk about a bit of a different topic. As I'm sure everyone knows, miHoYo released information about Ayaka, which leads I think many, including myself, to believe that both she and Inazuma are coming out next patch. Now if this is true, then Ayaka is likely going to use entirely new materials, which means the beginning of Inazuma for many of us will probably be frantically searching around for whatever enemies that Ayaka needs for her ascension and for her talent upgrades, for whatever materials we need for her ascensions, and whatever boss, assuming the boss is not Magokenki or the recently added Cryo boss. Now if I'm honest, I'm not entirely relishing the idea of having to do this, as I'm generally the type of person who likes to explore one area at a time and explore all of it. As an example of what I mean, in Breath of the Wild, I explored the first area that you were given, then followed the quest to go see Impa, explored that area, and then proceeded to completely explore each area one at a time in a counterclockwise fashion until I had gone through all the areas except for the middle, and then finally did go to the middle, fought Ganon, and beat the game. So having to dash around to get all the domains, and whatever areas the materials are in that we need, and whatever enemies that we need, isn't really the way I would like to play the game, but unfortunately, if we want to level Ayaka quickly, we'll just have to. Now there are two reasons why I'm bringing this up. One, I think that I may make a video going through the potential roles that Ayaka could have if she acts like the other sword characters in the game. As even without looking at the much dividing vegetable, we can still probably get an idea of what roles she can do by simply looking at the other characters that are in the game and comparing them. The second reason that I wanted to bring this up is simply because I personally am a big Legend of Zelda fan. And as many of you may know, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD was recently announced, and will come out likely a few days before the Inazuma, assuming it is Inazuma, patch drops. Now I do very much want to play this game, as my first playthrough of this game, when it originally came out, was miserable. The reason being, during that period of time, me and my siblings had grown tired long before of having to constantly buy batteries for controllers. So we had simply bought a good number, I believe 10 it was, I think, rechargeable batteries. And we used those rechargeable batteries for years. Now by the time this game came out, those rechargeable batteries were basically unusable. They would hold maybe about 20 minutes worth of charge for the Wii controller. Now the reason why that made this game miserable is because your controller then was permanently on low battery. And so Fi would never stop telling you that the Wii controller was on low battery. And thus we had to deal with this through the entire time playing the game. Constantly, endlessly being interrupted by Fi letting us know that our battery was low. And frankly, that made the game a little bit less fun. So this time around, I'm looking forward to playing it without that incredible annoyance. But as it is coming out at a similar time, if next patch is indeed Inazuma, it's going to be a little bit difficult for me as I have limited time to play video games, so I'm going to probably have to try to work out how exactly that's going to be. That might mean that I spend a little bit less time in Inazuma, or perhaps I might just get through the Inazuma content, and then, once it's kind of quieted down and I've done most of the things, then return to playing the Skyward Sword. Now I'm not entirely sure if I'll record it. I might, because unlike Genshin Impact, it would pretty much just be a playthrough rather than the hopefully helpful content that you can make for Genshin Impact. And I just wanted to quickly mention this as a new trailer for the Skyward Sword just dropped. And with that, we reached the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Are you excited for Kazuha? Do you have any different opinions on him? And are you interested in playing Skyward Sword again, or perhaps, maybe, for the first time? Please let me know down below in the comments. And I hope you all have a great day.